Hello, we're talking to Maja Davidovic, who contributed an article on the rectification of racial discrimination during World War II, the case of restitution laws in Serbia, where you're looking particularly at restitution issues regarding the Roma community. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are you looking at in your article, and what is the kind of key findings?
Yes. So the initial idea was not to look in the Roma community specifically, but to look into restitution laws and kind of see what Serbia has done to compensate for confiscated property that was taken during World War II. However, in that research, the issue of race came up, where I saw that this particular notion was used kind of selectively in laws to promote one group over the other, and that's where critical race theory actually comes in. This is something that has been explored very little in the European context, and even less in the context of the Balkans, because racism is not seen as a big issue. Yes, and that brings us to kind of the main finding of the article, which is that this particular law that Serbia passed in 2016, which is a law on heirless property, uses the notion of race to kind of define the atrocities that happened during the Holocaust as something that only happened to the Jewish population because of their race. But sadly, the truth is that the Roma community was equally as discriminated and equally as prosecuted in Serbia during World War II, especially particularly based on their race and on the so-called Himmler's decree on the gypsy question.
Mm-hmm. So why how do you explain that omission, that distinction which the law introduces, and what does this tell us about the larger, I guess, debate and coming to terms with the legacy of the Second World War and the Holocaust?
Yes, well, critical race theory, which was developed in the U.S., so it talks about a different kind of racial divide, one that is not specifically present in Serbia, but yet very applicable. Explains certain trends in the law and practices for the benefit of the discriminated minority, through what has been coined as interest convergence, which means that when we think that racial relations are getting better, it is often the case that this is only happening because the majority, in this case non-Jewish majority, will benefit as well. So I looked into what happened after the law was passed and how the law was received. And interestingly, of course, both American Embassy and Israeli Embassy, Jewish World Congress have all really praised this particular law very highly, because Serbia is one of the few countries in Europe which has a law on heirless property, and the only country in the Balkans. And then I wanted to see what was the follow-up and what follow-up events came. And actually, after I have submitted this article, interestingly enough, our Serbia's defense minister met with Israeli defense ministers, and it seems to be a very prominent arms deal coming. And in the narratives that are presented in this kind of political sphere, this particular law and the remembrance of the Holocaust and honoring victims, the Jewish victims only, is kind of used to give Serbia more leverage in this deal. Whereas, on the other hand, I think a valid argument is to say that Roma community as a whole perhaps did not hold as much property in 41 and until 45, like the Jewish community, but there were nearly equally as numerous, and the point is not to count the property, but just to give a chance for this claim to be made. Yes, and unlike Jewish community, Roma community does not have a state to stand behind them, and it does not really hold any power in the international arena. So I think that's one of the explanations of why this particular law is kind of used selectively to promote one and discriminate the other.
And I guess it also fits into the larger, let's say, domestic narrative where, you know, the Jewish community is more probably better perceived in Serbian domestic narratives than the Roma community. I mean, you have much more negative stereotypes towards Roma today, so restitution to Roma probably is less popular also domestically, not just internationally, as you mentioned.
Yeah, that's very true. You're very right. And you know, Serbia's Jewish community now counts maybe 1,500 people to 2,000 people, whereas Roma are, according to the latest official statistics, over 150,000. So it's a really big and really growing community. And ever since in the 90s and the fall of socialism, first hate crimes in Serbia have been committed towards members of the Roma community. Roma people have continuously been either ghettoized or just perceived as criminals, discriminated in all sorts of places, work and education as well. And another argument that follows for most countries, really, not just Serbia, when it comes to restitution, is that it's much easier to restitute now, more than 70 years after Holocaust, when the living survivors are very, very few. So
right.
So the cost is not as high, but it is. My initial thought was that the law itself and its application would be, you know, just wishful thinking or good on paper but not in practice. But actually, in the first 9 months, more than 40 objects, buildings and shops and apartments have been given back to the small Jewish community, in addition to the fact that, according to the law, the Jewish community receives 950,000 euros annually to kind of promote remembering of the crimes.
You also, I mean, as you mentioned, you've looked at this kind of critical race theory as a way to approach this question. How do you see this kind of, as you mentioned, a theory which has been very much based on the U.S. Context, where race is a very widely used terminology and concept to a region like Southeastern Europe? Do you see this as a theory which can travel? I mean, are you seeing it as a certain way? Your article contributes to this focus. There are other scholars. Catherine Baker is writing on race in the Balkans as a category. So do you see this as a venue of kind of exploring the terminology of race and applying it as a constructive analytical framework for the Balkans?
Yes, definitely. And in whole of Europe, actually, critical race theory might be rejected at times because just racial categorizations of any sort, even for statistics purposes, bring in very bad memories of what happened during World War II. But I think it's important precisely because we think of racial divides as African American population versus white American population. And then we from Southeastern Europe often like to claim that there's no racism. There is, but it's very individual, right? It's on a case-by-case basis how you, as a person, as a citizen, will deal with someone who has different skin color. But then people forget that there has been this eternal other in our societies as well, and maybe it did not come on the surface because people in the Balkans also were going through their own kind of oppression during the Ottoman Empire and later on. But as this law shows, and I'm sure many other practices, racism towards the Roma is not merely individual. It's very institutional and structural and communal, whether it's conscious or unconscious, as Charles Lawrence framed it. So I think it's above important to open more discussions on this issue, precisely when our respective countries in Southeastern Europe are moving towards rights respected.
Thank you, Maja. I mean, I think this, again, you're both making, increasing our understanding of issues of restitution and the debates, and also introducing maybe some or contributing to some new analytical categories which we can use for the study of Southeastern Europe, which are certainly very, very worthwhile to explore. So thank you very much for this interview and for your insights in the article as well.
Thanks.